Hear this clearly: God is not late, and He is not confused about your life. What you have felt shifting in your spirit is not imagination, and what you have sensed tightening and then loosening around you is not coincidence. Heaven has been in motion while you were waiting in silence. February 10/11 is not just another date on the calendar. It is a window where alignment is taking place. Alignment of people, alignment of resources, alignment of timing, alignment of purpose. Some things had to move out of the way before other things could move into place. What looked like delay was actually divine rearrangement. What felt like resistance was heaven recalibrating your position. You are not behind, you are being positioned. The pressure you endured was not to break you, but to bring you into precision. God does not waste seasons, and He does not waste suffering. Something is lining up, and when alignment finishes its work, breakthrough does not ask permission to enter. It arrives with authority. Alignment is not about movement, it is about placement. Many people confuse activity with progress, but heaven is far more interested in where you are positioned than how fast you are moving. There are seasons when God will slow you down, not because you are failing, but because speed without alignment produces exhaustion without results. February 10/11 marks a moment where divine order begins to replace confusion, where scattered pieces start forming a pattern you could not see before. Alignment is the invisible hand of God arranging people, timing, opportunities, and decisions so that one moment produces what years of effort could not. When alignment comes, struggle decreases and impact increases because you are no longer forcing doors, you are walking through doors that were already prepared. Sudden breakthrough is never random. It is the visible effect of an invisible process that has been working quietly over time. You thought nothing was happening because nothing was changing on the surface, but alignment happens first in the spirit realm before it manifests in the natural. God was shifting conversations you were not present in, redirecting paths you never walked, and delaying outcomes that would have damaged your future. Some connections had to be removed because they were misaligned with where you were going. Some opportunities had to close because they were too small for what was coming. Alignment requires subtraction before it produces multiplication. When things align, effort no longer feels heavy. What once required constant striving suddenly flows with ease. You notice that doors open without manipulation, favor shows up without explanation, and solutions appear where there were only questions before. This is because alignment places you in rhythm with divine timing. Timing is everything in the kingdom. A blessing released too early becomes a burden, and a promise fulfilled out of season creates stress instead of joy. God guards timing fiercely because He understands the weight of what He is about to release. February 10/11 represents a shift where timing and readiness meet, where you are no longer just desiring breakthrough, you are prepared to sustain it. Alignment also restores authority. When you are out of position, you may still have passion, but your words lack weight. When alignment is complete, your voice carries power again. What you speak begins to move things. What you pray begins to respond. What you declare begins to rearrange environments. Authority is not about volume, it is about position. A person standing in the right place can whisper and still command results. God is repositioning you so that your prayers stop bouncing off resistance and start penetrating barriers that once seemed immovable. Sudden breakthrough often follows prolonged pressure. Pressure reveals what is misaligned. It exposes weak foundations, misplaced priorities, and unhealthy attachments. That pressure you felt was not punishment, it was precision. God was tightening certain areas of your life so He could realign them accurately. Anything that cannot survive alignment cannot go into the next season with you. That is why some relationships grew strained, some plans fell apart, and some comforts were removed. Alignment is uncomfortable because it stretches you into a posture you have never held before. Once alignment is complete, acceleration follows naturally. You do not have to chase momentum, momentum finds you. You move further in a short time than you did in long seasons of effort. This is because aligned movement carries divine backing. Heaven supports what it positions. Breakthrough does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it enters quietly through consistency, clarity, and confidence returning to your spirit. You begin to trust again, not blindly, but with discernment sharpened by experience. Alignment brings clarity to confusion. Decisions that once felt overwhelming suddenly become simple. You know what to say yes to, and you are no longer afraid to say no. Discernment sharpens when alignment is present because your spirit is no longer fighting internal conflict. Peace becomes your confirmation. You are not anxious about missing out because alignment assures you that what is for you cannot bypass you. What God has aligned will meet you exactly where you are positioned. Sudden breakthrough is not always dramatic, but it is always decisive. It marks the end of one way of living and the beginning of another. Once alignment locks into place, you cannot return to old patterns without discomfort. Growth becomes irreversible. Your tolerance for chaos decreases, and your hunger for purpose increases. You become intentional with your time, guarded with your energy, and bold with your faith. Alignment makes you aware that your life is not random, your steps are not accidental, and your future is not fragile. God is not experimenting with you. He is executing a plan that required precise timing, exact placement, and unwavering obedience. And now the pieces are locking into place, the atmosphere is shifting, and the breakthrough you prayed for is responding to alignment rather than effort, because what aligns under God's authority must eventually produce under His command. Before anything changes in your hands, something always shifts in the spirit. The natural realm only echoes what has already been decided in the unseen. That is why there are moments when you feel relief before the problem leaves, peace before the answer shows up, and confidence before the evidence appears. What shifted first was not your circumstance, but the spiritual environment surrounding it. God does not move randomly, He moves strategically. When heaven adjusts its position, the earth eventually has no choice but to comply. You were sensing movement because movement had already begun where your eyes could not reach. There are battles you never saw because God never allowed you to witness them. Resistance was addressed before it reached your doorstep. Delays were confronted before they became denials. What looked like silence was actually negotiation in the spirit, rearrangement in the unseen, and authority being exercised on your behalf. Some things did not happen because God intercepted them before they could manifest. Protection often looks like nothing happening, but restraint is just as powerful as release. When God blocks something, it is not always punishment. Sometimes it is preservation. The shift in the spirit also involved clarity being restored to your discernment. That is why confusion began to lift, even though circumstances stayed the same. You started seeing people differently, recognizing patterns you once excused, and feeling uneasy about environments that once felt comfortable. That discomfort was not fear, it was awareness. God was sharpening your perception so you would not misinterpret what was coming next. A breakthrough without discernment becomes a trap, so God adjusted your vision before He adjusted your surroundings. Something else shifted: permission. Certain obstacles were standing not because they were stronger than you, but because they had not yet been addressed in the spirit realm. When God gives permission, resistance loses its legal ground. What was once allowed to block you is now required to move. That is why you feel a boldness rising that you did not manufacture. You are not forcing courage. Courage is responding to authority being restored. When heaven authorizes movement, fear no longer has jurisdiction over your decisions. Alignment also shifted your spiritual posture. You stopped begging for what you were authorized to receive. Your prayers became less emotional and more intentional. Your words began to carry weight because they were no longer fueled by desperation, but by agreement. Agreement is powerful. When your spirit comes into agreement with what heaven has already decided, manifestation becomes inevitable. You are no longer praying to convince God, you are declaring what God has already confirmed. In the spirit, cycles were interrupted. Patterns that repeated for years were confronted at the root. What you experienced before was not always the same problem returning. It was the same door being reopened. This time, the door was closed. That is why old triggers no longer have the same effect, and familiar attacks no longer hit with the same intensity. When a cycle breaks in the spirit, the emotional charge attached to it dissolves. You are not healed because the memory disappeared. You are healed because the power it held was revoked. There was also a transfer taking place. Strength replaced weariness. Hope replaced resignation. Vision replaced survival mode. You may not have noticed it immediately, but your internal language changed. You stopped saying, if, and started saying when. You stopped asking, why me, and started asking, what now? That shift did not come from motivation, it came from movement in the unseen. God was adjusting your internal capacity so you could carry what was coming without collapsing under its weight. Another shift occurred in timing. What felt slow was actually precise. God delayed certain outcomes because you were growing faster internally than externally. He refused to let your life outrun your maturity. Timing protects promises. That is why some doors did not open when you wanted them to. They would have required you to perform instead of become. Now timing is catching up with development. What you have become can now sustain what is about to be released. In the spirit, your name was mentioned, not by people, but by heaven. Decisions were made in rooms you were never invited into. Favor was released through channels you did not pursue. God does not always need your presence to promote you. He only needs alignment. When heaven speaks your name, earth responds with opportunity. You are stepping into outcomes you did not orchestrate because alignment attracts divine intervention without effort. What shifted also included your authority over your own mind. Anxiety lost ground. Fear stopped dominating your thoughts. You may still feel pressure, but it no longer controls your direction. That is a spiritual victory before it is an emotional one. When the mind comes back into order, the future opens without resistance. Peace is not passive. It is a sign that governance has been restored. You are now living in the echo of a spiritual decision that has already been made. The natural realm is catching up to what heaven finalized. Do not be discouraged if everything has not appeared yet. Manifestation follows agreement, not impatience. Stay aligned. Stay aware. Stay responsive. The shift already happened. The seal has already been broken. And what you are about to witness is not the beginning of the move, but the visible confirmation of what was settled when God adjusted the atmosphere around your life and recalibrated your position within it. Timing is the language of heaven. God does not rush, and he does not lag. He moves with exact precision. What feels late to you is often right on schedule in the divine calendar. When heaven and earth agree, results manifest without strain. That agreement is not accidental, it is cultivated through obedience, patience, and alignment. There are moments when God waits for the earth to be ready to host what heaven has already prepared. February 10, 11 represents a convergence where readiness and release meet, where preparation aligns with permission, and where timing shifts from delay into execution. Heaven operates by sequence. Nothing is released out of order. Even miracles have timing, because timing protects purpose. A breakthrough released before its appointed time can become overwhelming rather than empowering. That is why God often develops your character longer than he develops your opportunity. Opportunity without maturity creates collapse. Heaven ensures that when doors open, you have the capacity to walk through them without losing yourself in the process. Timing is God's safeguard over your destiny. When heaven and earth agree, resistance loses its leverage. Obstacles that once delayed you suddenly move aside, not because they changed, but because the time changed. There are forces that cannot stop you, but they can slow you until permission is given for forward movement. Once timing shifts, even opposition must cooperate with progress. That is why some things that were immovable for years begin to change quickly. The same mountain that blocked you becomes the platform that elevates you. Agreement also brings clarity. Confusion is often a symptom of misaligned timing. When you are early, you struggle. When you are late, you panic. But when you are on time, peace becomes your confirmation. Peace does not mean absence of challenge, it means confidence in sequence. You may still face complexity, but you are no longer uncertain about direction. Direction becomes clear when timing locks into place. Timing tests trust. Waiting reveals what you believe about God when outcomes are delayed. It exposes whether your faith is rooted in relationship or results. God often allows waiting not to frustrate you, but to free you from dependence on visible validation. When your confidence is no longer tied to immediate results, you become stable enough to carry lasting success. Timing builds endurance so that breakthrough does not destroy you. Heaven and earth agree when your will aligns with God's purpose. That alignment is not passive surrender, it is active cooperation. You begin to move when God moves and rest when God rests. You stop forcing doors and start discerning seasons. Discernment saves you time. It keeps you from pouring energy into assignments that have expired and from clinging to strategies that no longer fit your future. Timing teaches you when to release what once worked so you can receive what works now. There are moments when God intentionally withholds information because knowing too much too soon would cause anxiety instead of anticipation. Timing controls revelation. You receive clarity in stages because growth happens in layers. What you know now is sufficient for the step you are on. More information will come when movement requires it. Trust is built when you walk with partial sight and still remain obedient. That obedience invites acceleration later. When timing aligns, provision aligns with it. Resources show up at the moment they are needed, not before and not after. Early provision can create waste, and late provision creates fear. God times supply to match purpose. That is why some needs were not met when you wanted them to be. God was teaching you dependence, not denial. Now provision is approaching with precision because purpose is ready to receive it. Heaven's timing also redeems what felt wasted. Seasons that looked unproductive were actually preparatory. Skills you developed in obscurity become essential in visibility. Lessons learned in isolation become wisdom applied in leadership. Nothing submitted to God is ever lost. Timing reveals the value of what you thought was insignificant. When heaven and earth agree, even your past begins to make sense. Another aspect of timing is momentum. When God releases momentum, progress compounds quickly. What once took years begins to take months, then weeks, then moments. This is not luck, it is alignment producing efficiency. Momentum is the reward of patience. Those who endure waiting without bitterness are entrusted with acceleration without instability. You are stepping into a season where movement feels natural again. Timing also demands responsiveness. When the window opens, hesitation can cost opportunity. Discernment is required not only to wait, but to move when instructed. Obedience in motion is just as important as obedience in stillness. God is releasing a grace to act decisively without fear. Confidence returns when you realize you are not moving alone, but in agreement with heaven. When heaven and earth agree, outcomes are sustained. Success is not temporary because it was not forced. Favor rests on what God times. You do not have to defend what God establishes. What comes through alignment remains through alignment. The same God who opened the door stays to keep it open. You are not stepping into a fragile season, but into a fortified one where timing has already neutralized resistance, secured provision, restored confidence, and positioned you to move forward without striving because this moment was not rushed, not delayed, but appointed before you ever recognized its arrival. Cycles do not break because time passes, they break because authority intervenes. Many people wait for change, hoping repetition will exhaust itself, but cycles are sustained by permission, not duration. What has been repeating in your life was not always happening because you lacked effort or faith. It continued because it had not yet been confronted at its root. February 10, 11 represents a moment where interruption replaces repetition, where God steps into patterns that once felt automatic and declares that they can no longer proceed. Breaking cycles is not about trying harder. It is about removing access. Some cycles are emotional. You find yourself reacting the same way, retreating the same way, doubting the same way, even when the situation is different. Others are relational. The same type of people show up with different names and faces, but the outcome is always familiar. Some cycles are financial, spiritual, or mental. The common denominator is not circumstance, it is alignment. Cycles repeat when something is misaligned internally, even if it looks functional externally. God addresses alignment before he addresses outcomes. Breaking cycles requires exposure. Patterns thrive in familiarity and hide behind normalization. You called it just the way things are, but heaven never agreed with that narrative. God disrupts cycles by challenging what you accepted as normal. That is why awareness increased before change appeared. You began noticing triggers, recognizing warning signs, and questioning behaviors you once overlooked. Awareness is not condemnation, it is preparation. God exposes patterns not to shame you, but to free you. Cycles also break through separation. Certain environments, voices, and influences cannot follow you into the next phase because they reinforce old patterns. Separation is not rejection, it is protection. God removes you from spaces that keep pulling you back into familiar dysfunction. That removal may feel abrupt, uncomfortable, or even lonely, but it is intentional. You cannot sustain a new pattern in an old environment. Freedom requires distance from what feeds repetition. Another reason cycles persist is unresolved identity. When you see yourself through the lens of past failure, you unconsciously recreate scenarios that confirm that identity. God breaks cycles by redefining who you are. Identity shift precedes behavior change. When you no longer see yourself as the person who always loses, struggles, or settles, you stop making decisions that support that narrative. February 10, 11 signals a moment where identity is being recalibrated. You are no longer responding from who you were, but from who you are becoming. Breaking cycles also involves forgiveness, not because others deserve it, but because cycles feed on emotional residue. Unresolved pain keeps doors open to repetition. Forgiveness closes those doors. It does not excuse what happened, it ends its influence. When forgiveness is released, the emotional charge attached to the cycle weakens. You are no longer reacting from wounds. You are responding from wisdom. That shift alone disrupts patterns that relied on emotional triggers to survive. Some cycles were generational. They did not start with you, but they attempted to continue through you. Patterns of fear, limitation, silence, or compromise often pass quietly from one generation to the next because no one challenges them. God chose you to be the interruption. That calling comes with resistance because cycles defend their survival aggressively. The pressure you felt was not because you were weak, but because you were confronting something that had not been confronted before. Resistance is often a sign that you are breaking ground, not failing. Cycles also break when language changes. Words reinforce patterns. What you repeatedly say about yourself, your future, and your capacity either sustains cycles or dismantles them. God shifts your language before he shifts your life. You stop speaking in absolutes like always and never. You stop declaring defeat before the outcome arrived. Language is powerful because it reveals agreement. When your words change, it signals that agreement has shifted and cycles lose their support. Breaking cycles requires consistency, not perfection. Old patterns attempt to reassert themselves when they sense change. They rely on discouragement to regain control. God gives you grace to remain consistent even when progress feels slow. Every aligned decision weakens the cycle's influence. You are not required to be flawless. You are required to be faithful. Faithfulness compounds quietly until repetition no longer has the strength to return. Another key to breaking cycles is boundaries. Without boundaries, cycles find access points. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They determine what gets close enough to influence you. God teaches boundaries so freedom can be maintained. You are learning to protect your time, energy, and focus. That protection is not selfish, it is stewardship. What God delivers you from must be guarded intentionally. Cycles finally break when replacement occurs. God does not just remove patterns, He installs new ones. Healthy rhythms replace destructive habits. Truth replaces lies. Peace replaces chaos. You are not left empty. You are being filled with alignment. That is why this season feels unfamiliar. You are learning a new way of living. Familiar struggle is being replaced with unfamiliar stability, and unfamiliar stability can feel unsettling at first. Breaking cycles changes your future trajectory. Decisions you make now carry different weight because they are no longer filtered through repetition. You are choosing from freedom, not compulsion. That freedom feels lighter, but it is also more responsible. God trusts you with it because you are no longer bound to what once controlled you. What ends now does not have permission to return, because authority has been exercised, access has been removed, identity has been restored, and the pattern that once repeated without resistance is now encountering interruption, opposition, and displacement, and it cannot survive in an environment where alignment governs choices, awareness sharpens discernment, and obedience continues even when old cycles attempt to reintroduce themselves through memory, familiarity, or fear. Resistance is not always a sign that something is wrong. Often it is evidence that something significant is near. Opposition tends to intensify when alignment is close because what has benefited from disorder recognizes that its time is ending. You were not suddenly attacked because you made a mistake. Pressure increased because you were approaching a threshold. Resistance does not show up to stop what is weak. It confronts what threatens to advance. That friction you felt was confirmation that you were no longer stagnant, no longer hidden, no longer overlooked by forces that once ignored you. Resistance exposes proximity. When you are far from breakthrough, opposition remains passive. When you draw near, resistance becomes aggressive. That is why things escalated unexpectedly. Situations that seemed manageable suddenly became complicated. People who were neutral became confrontational. Doubts that were quiet became loud. This does not mean you lost ground. It means you gained attention. Resistance reacts to movement. Stillness does not provoke challenge, but progress does. Many misinterpret resistance and retreat when they should press forward. Fear convinces them that difficulty is a warning instead of a witness. But resistance often appears right before transition. It is the final attempt to discourage, distract, or delay. If it could have stopped you earlier, it would have. The fact that it is confronting you now suggests that something has already shifted in your favor. Resistance arrives late because breakthrough is close. Resistance also reveals areas of growth. What used to overwhelm you now irritates you. What once paralyzed you now frustrates you. That emotional shift matters. It means you are no longer intimidated by the same things. Intimidation thrives when confidence is low. Frustration shows that confidence is returning. You are no longer questioning whether you can move forward. You are questioning why the obstacle is still there. That change in internal dialogue signals maturity. When resistance increases, discernment becomes critical. Not every battle requires engagement. Some resistance is meant to drain you, not stop you. God teaches you when to confront and when to bypass. Wisdom saves energy. You are learning that not every provocation deserves your response. Silence can be strategic. Focus can be defensive. Alignment teaches you how to move without reacting to every distraction. Resistance often targets consistency. It attacks your routines, your focus, and your commitment. It does not need to destroy your faith. It only needs to disrupt your rhythm. That is why distractions increased when you became disciplined. Interruptions multiplied when you became intentional. Resistance understands that sustained alignment produces unstoppable momentum. If it can break your consistency, it can delay your progress. That is why maintaining small, faithful actions matters more now than dramatic gestures. Another tactic of resistance is exaggeration. It makes obstacles seem larger than they are and progress seem smaller than it is. It highlights what is missing while minimizing what has improved. That distortion is intentional. Resistance thrives on discouragement. God counters that by sharpening your awareness. You are learning to measure progress by growth, not speed. Growth is happening even when outcomes are not immediate. Resistance also tests resolve. It asks whether you believe what you said you believed when things were calm. Pressure reveals conviction. Anyone can declare faith when movement is easy. True commitment is proven when resistance questions your decision. This is not punishment. It is confirmation. God allows resistance to reveal strength you did not know you had. You are discovering resilience because circumstances require it. Resistance cannot stop what alignment authorizes. It can only delay what doubt permits. That is why agreement matters. When you remain in agreement with purpose, resistance loses leverage. It may be loud, but it is no longer powerful. Noise does not equal authority. Opposition can shout, but it cannot overrule what heaven has already approved. Confidence grows when you understand that resistance is reacting, not leading. Resistance often comes through familiar channels. Old fears resurface. Former insecurities speak again. Past failures attempt to rewrite the narrative. This familiarity is deceptive. It tries to convince you that nothing has changed. But the fact that old tactics are being reused proves that no new strategy exists. Resistance is recycling because innovation has failed. You are facing echoes, not new threats. When resistance shows up, endurance becomes your weapon. Not dramatic endurance, but quiet persistence. Showing up again, choosing alignment again, saying no again, trusting again. Resistance weakens when it realizes you are not going to quit. It feeds on reaction, not resilience. Calm consistency frustrates opposition because it removes emotional access points. Resistance also clarifies priorities. It forces you to decide what matters enough to protect. Comfort becomes less important than calling. Approval becomes less important than obedience. Ease becomes less important than effectiveness. These internal shifts prepare you for what is next. Breakthrough requires a different level of responsibility, and resistance exposes whether you are ready to carry it. The closer you get, the more precise resistance becomes. It targets specific areas because it knows general attacks no longer work. That precision is evidence of proximity. You are not fighting for survival, you are navigating transition. Transition is uncomfortable because it requires release. Resistance resists release. It wants you to hold on to what is expiring. God invites you to let go so you can move forward unencumbered. When resistance peaks, alignment must deepen. This is not the time to abandon disciplines or dilute focus. This is the time to simplify, to stay grounded, to remain anchored. You are not being tested to see if you will fail. You are being proven to see if you will finish. Resistance does not get the final word. It is not an indicator of defeat, but a marker of distance. You are closer than you think. The intensity you feel is not because you are losing, but because what you are approaching cannot be ignored, cannot be delayed much longer, and cannot be accessed without confronting the final layers of opposition that stand between where you were and where alignment is now carrying you toward. Even as pressure attempts to speak louder than purpose, consistency answers louder than fear, and obedience continues to move forward despite resistance attempting to persuade you that proximity is danger rather than confirmation of breakthrough. Waiting just beyond the point where resistance has reached its maximum and has begun to exhaust itself, realizing that it can no longer intimidate, distract, or derail what has already been authorized to advance. Acceleration is attractive, but realignment is necessary. Many want speed without separation, increase without distance, promotion without pruning. But heaven never accelerates what is misaligned. Before God speeds anything up, he slows it down long enough to reposition it correctly. Separation is not punishment, it is precision. It is God removing what would destabilize you at the velocity he intends to release. Acceleration without separation creates chaos. Realignment requires space, and space is created through separation. Separation often feels like loss because it removes what was familiar. Familiarity can be comfortable even when it is limiting. God separates you from environments, habits, relationships, and mindsets not because they are evil, but because they are incompatible with where you are going. What worked in one season can become a weight in the next. Acceleration demands lightness. You cannot move quickly while carrying unnecessary attachments. Separation is how God lightens the load. Many misunderstand separation and interpret it as rejection. But God does not remove you from what sustains you. He removes you from what restricts you. Separation is an act of favor. It protects your future from your past. That is why some exits were not negotiated, they were enforced. God closed doors you kept reopening. He ended conversations you kept explaining. He disrupted routines you kept defending. Not because you were wrong, but because you were ready. Separation also clarifies identity. When familiar voices are removed, you are forced to listen inwardly. You stop defining yourself by who surrounds you and start recognizing who you are becoming. Identity matures in separation. That is why growth often feels lonely before it feels powerful. God isolates before he elevates, not to abandon you, but to refine you. Isolation is not the destination, it is the preparation. Acceleration requires agreement, and agreement cannot happen in divided spaces. When too many influences compete for authority in your life, movement becomes fragmented. Separation simplifies focus. It reduces noise. It brings clarity. You begin to hear direction without distortion. Decisions become easier when fewer voices are involved. God separates so alignment can become clear enough to sustain speed. Some separations happen internally before they happen externally. Your appetite changes. What once excited you no longer satisfies you. Conversations feel shallow. Environments feel heavy. This internal separation signals that acceleration is approaching. You are outgrowing spaces before you leave them. God shifts desire before he shifts location. When desire changes, obedience follows naturally. Separation also tests trust. Letting go exposes what you rely on for security. God removes supports so he can become your source. Acceleration requires dependence on God rather than systems that cannot move at divine speed. Human structures move slowly. God moves suddenly. To accelerate with him, you must be willing to release what cannot keep pace. Trust deepens when familiar supports are replaced with divine guidance. Another aspect of separation is pruning. Pruning feels counterintuitive because it removes what appears productive. But productivity without purpose leads to burnout. God prunes so fruit can increase in quality, not just quantity. Acceleration is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters most with greater impact. Pruning refocuses energy. It redirects strength. It sharpens effectiveness. Separation also reveals loyalty. Who stays connected to you when benefit is removed? Who supports you when visibility decreases? God uses separation to expose motives, both yours and others. This exposure protects you from alliances that would fail under pressure. Acceleration places demands on relationships. God ensures that what remains can endure the pace. Many resist separation because they equate it with regression. But separation often looks like stepping back before stepping forward. God pulls you aside to reposition you ahead. It is not a setback, it is a setup. The pause you experienced was not stagnation, it was alignment. Acceleration requires exact placement. A small misalignment at high speed causes damage. God refuses to rush what he intends to last. Separation also builds discernment. When you are no longer surrounded by constant input, you become sensitive to subtle guidance. You learn to recognize peace as direction and discomfort as warning. Discernment is essential for acceleration because speed amplifies consequences. Quick decisions without discernment create costly mistakes. God sharpens discernment in separation so acceleration does not become reckless. As separation completes its work, strength returns, confidence rebuilds, focus sharpens, you feel lighter, clearer, more intentional. What once felt forced begins to flow. This is the signal that acceleration is near. Movement becomes effortless because alignment is secure. You are no longer dragging resistance behind you. Everything is facing the same direction. Acceleration is not chaotic, it is controlled. It feels fast, but it feels right. You recognize the rhythm. Opportunities arrive in sequence. Resources meet readiness. Timing clicks into place. This only happens because separation removed what would have disrupted momentum. What you released made room for what is coming. God never accelerates you away from purpose, He accelerates you into it. Separation ensures that when movement increases, direction remains correct. You are not moving faster just to move, you are moving forward with intention. What felt like isolation was alignment. What felt like loss was leverage being removed. What felt like delay was positioning for speed. Acceleration is approaching because separation has done its work. You are lighter, you are clearer, you are focused, you are aligned. The pace is about to change, not because you forced it, but because everything unnecessary has been removed, every distraction has been reduced, every misalignment has been corrected, and now movement can happen without friction, without confusion, without compromise. As you step into a season where acceleration is not overwhelming but ordered, not exhausting but empowering, not chaotic but intentional, because realignment has been completed through separation that prepared you to move faster without losing stability, clarity, or direction as momentum begins to build and alignment carries you forward into what could never be sustained without first being set apart from what could not follow you into this next phase of motion. Delay does not cancel promise, it conditions it. What you experienced was not denial, but restraint. God withholds release when the environment cannot sustain what He intends to give. A promise released into the wrong conditions becomes vulnerable. That is why some things took longer than expected. Heaven was not withholding from you. Heaven was guarding what belonged to you. Delay is often proof of value. God does not rush what carries weight. Delayed promises are usually connected to layered purposes. What God plans to release is not singular in impact. It affects more than one area of your life, more than one person, more than one season. Because of that reach, timing becomes critical. God considers consequences you cannot see. He accounts for relationships, responsibilities, and readiness. Delay allows all components to come into agreement so release does not create imbalance. What is coming must land on solid ground. During delay, development happens quietly. Character is refined. Discernment is sharpened. Endurance is strengthened. You learned patience not as passive waiting, but as active trust. You learned how to remain aligned without visible confirmation. That growth matters because delayed promises often require maturity to manage. God does not just fulfill promises, He entrusts them. Trust requires capacity. Delay increases capacity. Delay also exposes motive. It reveals whether you desire the promise or the God who made it. When results are postponed, superficial faith fades and genuine devotion deepens. God uses delay to purify intention. What remains after disappointment is what can handle fulfillment. You are still here because your commitment survived waiting. That survival qualified you for release. Some delays were strategic because opposition was present. Not all resistance is external. Sometimes internal patterns must be addressed before release occurs. God will not place new wine into old containers. Delay allowed internal restructuring. Mindsets shifted. Expectations matured. You stopped chasing outcomes and started stewarding process. That shift is significant. Process thinking sustains promise thinking. Delayed promises also benefit from alignment. Timing had to converge. Other people had to be positioned. Resources had to be prepared. Doors had to be opened and closed. God orchestrates networks you may never see. Delay allows those unseen preparations to complete. When release happens, it feels sudden, but it is the result of long-term arrangement. Sudden does not mean unprepared. There were moments when delay tested hope. Hope deferred can feel heavy. It challenges confidence and invites doubt. But you did not abandon hope, you adjusted it. You learned to hope without pressure, to believe without urgency. That kind of hope is resilient. It does not collapse when timelines shift. God honors resilient hope because it reflects trust rather than demand. Delay also redefined success. You stopped measuring progress by speed and started measuring it by alignment. You learned that being on time is more important than being early. Early fulfillment can feel exciting but become exhausting. Right? Time fulfillment brings peace. Peace is the confirmation of timing. That peace you feel now, even before full manifestation, signals that delay has completed its work. Some promises were delayed because you were still attached to substitutes. God will not compete with alternatives. Delay exposes replacements you leaned on when fulfillment did not come. Those substitutes provided comfort but limited growth. God allowed delay to loosen those attachments. Now your hands are free to receive what cannot be held alongside compromise. Freedom prepares you for fullness. Delayed promises often return with increase. What was postponed grows stronger, clearer, and more impactful. Delay adds layers. It deepens meaning. It amplifies effect. You are not receiving what you asked for in the same form you imagined. You are receiving something refined by time, strengthened by resistance, and protected by wisdom. Delay upgraded the promise. Another purpose of delay is perspective. Distance gives clarity. You can now see why certain outcomes would have been harmful earlier. You recognize that what you wanted then would not have sustained you now. Gratitude replaces frustration when understanding arrives. Understanding does not erase disappointment, but it redeems it. Delay makes room for appreciation that immediate fulfillment often bypasses. Delay also trained you to listen. You became attentive to subtle guidance. You learned to discern direction without urgency clouding judgment. Listening prepares you for leadership. Many delayed promises involve influence, responsibility, or visibility. God trains leaders in waiting. Those who cannot wait cannot lead well. Delay is leadership training disguised as postponement. Now release approaches because resistance has weakened and readiness has matured. What once required striving will require stewardship. Stewardship demands presence, awareness, and responsibility. You are no longer asking if it will happen. You are preparing for how to manage it. That shift marks transition. Delay has moved from frustration to anticipation. Release does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it enters quietly through opportunity, conversation, or decision. Stay attentive. Delayed promises often manifest incrementally before they manifest completely. Small confirmations precede large outcomes. Honor the small. They are signals that the hold has lifted. What returns after delay carries authority. It is not fragile. It does not require constant defense. God releases promises when they can stand on their own. That stability is a gift. You will not have to fight to keep what God gives at the right time. What is released now comes with reinforcement. Delay also removed desperation. Desperation distorts judgment. You are no longer driven by urgency, but guided by wisdom. That calm confidence allows you to receive without anxiety. Anxiety shortens lifespan of fulfillment. Peace extends it. God delayed so you could receive without fear of loss. The release of delayed promises marks the end of striving and the beginning of stewardship. You move from asking to managing, from hoping to holding, from believing to building. What is given now demands intentionality. You are not stepping into fantasy, you are stepping into responsibility. Delayed promises often arrive differently than expected, but better than imagined. They fit who you have become. They align with your current values. They complement your maturity. God does not fulfill outdated versions of prayers. He fulfills prayers as they evolve through growth. What is coming matches you now. As release begins, stay aligned. Do not rush ahead of grace. Let unfolding happen in sequence. What God delayed deliberately will unfold deliberately. You are not behind. You are on time. The waiting season is ending because its purpose has been fulfilled. What was held back is now moving forward. Not because circumstances suddenly improved, but because you did, because alignment replaced impatience, maturity replaced urgency, trust replaced striving, and the promise that was protected through delay is now responding to readiness, stability, and clarity that only time, obedience, and endurance could produce as the release begins to unfold layer by layer, restoring what was postponed without rushing what must now be stewarded carefully, intentionally, and with awareness that delay did not weaken the promise but strengthened it through preparation that has positioned you to receive without collapse. Or compromise as movement replaces waiting and anticipation, gives way to responsibility, and progress begins to take shape in ways that confirm that nothing was lost, nothing was wasted, and nothing was denied, only delayed until alignment made release inevitable. Authority does not disappear overnight. It erodes gradually when confidence is shaken, when trust is betrayed, when outcomes disappoint, and when silence feels safer than speaking. What you experienced was not loss of calling, but interruption of expression. Your voice did not weaken because it lacked truth. It quieted because it carried wounds. God never revoked your authority, but He allowed a season where it was refined. Authority that has never been challenged cannot be trusted. Authority that survives resistance becomes grounded, stable, and effective. Authority is restored from the inside out. Before your words carry weight externally, conviction must return internally. That is why courage began to rise quietly. You noticed yourself thinking more clearly, questioning less fearfully, and hesitating less often. Restoration does not begin with volume, it begins with certainty. When you know who you are, you no longer need to over-explain, over-defend, or over-prove. Authority speaks plainly because it is secure. Your voice was never meant to be loud all the time, it was meant to be accurate. Accuracy requires alignment. God had to realign your heart with your assignment so that what you speak matches what heaven endorses. Misaligned voices create noise but not movement. Aligned voices may sound simple, but they produce results. Authority returns when your words come into agreement with divine intention rather than emotional reaction. There were moments when you withheld your voice because speaking seemed costly. You learned that words can provoke backlash, misunderstanding, or isolation. Silence felt like protection. God allowed that silence not to silence you permanently, but to teach you discernment. Now you know when to speak, how to speak, and what deserves your voice. Authority is not speaking about everything, it is speaking about what matters. Restored authority carries restraint. You no longer feel compelled to respond to every opinion or challenge every misunderstanding. Confidence has replaced defensiveness. Authority does not rush to clarify itself. It stands steady and allows truth to speak over time. That steadiness is new. It signals that your voice is no longer driven by approval, but guided by conviction. Authority is also restored through healing. Pain distorts tone. Unresolved wounds leak into language. God addressed what hurt you before He amplified you. That healing softened sharp edges without dulling truth. You can now speak with firmness without hostility, clarity without cruelty, confidence without arrogance. This balance is evidence of restoration. Authority that heals as it confronts is rare and powerful. Your voice is also being restored because your perspective has matured. You see complexity where you once saw absolutes. You understand process where you once demanded instant results. This depth adds weight to your words. People listen to voices that carry understanding, not just passion. Your experiences refined your insight. Authority grows when wisdom replaces impulse. Restored authority does not beg for attention, it attracts it. You may notice that people lean in when you speak now. Conversations shift. Your words linger. This is not because you changed your vocabulary, but because alignment changed your presence. Authority is felt before it is heard. Presence communicates credibility before words ever form. There was a time when you questioned whether your voice still mattered. Doubt whispered that silence was safer, that influence had passed, that others were better positioned. Those lies lost power because obedience remained. You continued to align even when affirmation was absent. That obedience qualified you for restoration. God entrusts authority to those who remain faithful without applause. Authority is also restored when fear loses control. Fear makes voices shrink or sharpen unnecessarily. As fear loosens its grip, expression becomes natural again. You speak without rehearsing every outcome. You trust that truth will land where it is meant to. That trust is new. It signals freedom. Free voices carry authority because they are not manipulated by anticipated reactions. Another aspect of restored authority is responsibility. What you say now carries impact. God does not restore voices for entertainment, but for direction. Your words are meant to build, correct, encourage, and activate. That responsibility requires awareness. Authority demands integrity. You are learning to speak with intention, knowing that words can shape environments, influence decisions, and shift mindsets. Your voice is also being restored in prayer. What you declare now moves with confidence. You are not asking timidly, you are agreeing boldly. Prayer becomes partnership when authority is restored. You pray from alignment rather than anxiety. That shift changes outcomes. Heaven responds to agreement, not desperation. Authority restoration often follows a season of being misunderstood. Misunderstanding strips away dependence on human validation. When approval is removed, authenticity emerges. Your voice no longer adjusts itself to fit expectations. It stands as it is. That authenticity carries authority because it cannot be easily manipulated or silenced. You may notice that speaking feels easier now. Words come without force. Expression flows without pressure. This ease is not carelessness, it is confidence. Confidence does not mean absence of humility. It means presence of assurance. You know what you carry, and you are no longer afraid to release it. Restored authority also brings boundaries. You no longer allow your voice to be used in spaces that dishonor it. You choose environments wisely. You recognize when silence is strength and when speech is assignment. Authority discerns timing. Speaking too early weakens impact. Speaking at the right moment amplifies it. Your voice carries history now. It has weight because it has survived. Survivors speak differently. They do not waste words. They speak from depth, not theory. That depth resonates. People trust voices that have endured. Your endurance gave your voice credibility. Authority is not about dominance, it is about influence. Influence flows from trust. Trust flows from consistency. You have been consistent even when unseen. That consistency is now being recognized. Doors open for your voice because alignment attracts opportunity. As authority returns, intimidation fades. You are not threatened by other voices. You recognize that authority is not competitive. There is room for multiple voices when each is aligned. Comparison loses relevance. You focus on assignment rather than audience. Restored authority also brings responsibility to listen. You speak with confidence, but you listen with humility. Authority that listens remains teachable. Teachable voices stay effective. God restores authority to those who remain receptive. Your voice is being restored because you are ready to carry it without distortion. You are not speaking to prove worth. You are speaking to fulfill purpose. That shift changes everything. Words spoken from purpose carry clarity, stability, and direction. They do not need embellishment. They do not need defense. As your voice strengthens, alignment deepens. You speak what you live. There is congruence between message and movement. That congruence is authority. People follow voices that align with actions. Authority restored means you no longer doubt the impact of obedience. You speak even when outcomes are not immediate. You trust that words planted in alignment will produce fruit in time. That trust removes urgency and adds endurance. What was quieted temporarily is now returning with precision. Your voice is not coming back louder, but clearer. Not sharper, but stronger. Not reactive, but rooted. Authority is being restored because you can now carry it without fear, without compromise, without distortion, as alignment stabilizes expression and your words begin to move environments again through clarity, conviction, and confidence that no longer depends on validation but on agreement with purpose, timing, and truth that has been refined through silence, endurance, and obedience that prepared your voice to speak again with weight that cannot be ignored or dismissed. Positioning determines outcome more than effort ever will. You can work hard and still struggle if you are standing in the wrong place. God is far more concerned with where you are than how busy you are. Strategic positioning is not about chance, it is about intention. Every move God makes is calculated, not hurried. What felt like random detours were actually directional shifts, placing you where future provision, opportunity, and influence could find you without resistance. You were not being delayed, you were being placed. Positioning happens before visibility. God often moves you quietly, so you do not resist the change with fear or ego. Loud transitions attract interference. Silent repositioning protects the process. That is why some changes happened without explanation. Conversations ended without closure. Paths shifted without announcement. God was moving you out of reach of what could not follow you into what is next. Strategic positioning often feels subtle until its impact becomes undeniable. You cannot receive what is assigned to a location you are no longer meant to occupy. Some blessings are geographic, relational, mental, or spiritual. If you remain in the wrong position, you may never encounter what was prepared for you. God relocates people before he releases provision. He adjusts posture before he assigns responsibility. Positioning aligns you with access. There were moments when staying felt safer than moving. Familiar environments provided predictability even when they lacked growth. God disrupted comfort because comfort can trap destiny. Strategic positioning requires trust. You had to move without full clarity. You had to obey without guarantees. That obedience mattered. God positions those who trust him beyond what they can explain. Positioning is not just external, it is internal. God shifted how you see yourself. You no longer approach life from insecurity or urgency. You stand with awareness. That internal repositioning changes how others perceive you. Confidence without arrogance attracts opportunity. Strategic positioning restores internal alignment so external movement becomes effective. Timing plays a crucial role in positioning. Being in the right place too early creates frustration. Being there too late creates regret. God synchronizes positioning with readiness. That is why movement felt slow. God was aligning your arrival with opportunity. Timing ensures that when you arrive, doors are open rather than closed. Strategic positioning also involves proximity. God brings you close to what you need without making it obvious. He places you within reach of conversations, ideas, and people that will matter later. Proximity creates opportunity without pressure. You are close enough to observe, learn, and prepare without being exposed prematurely. Observation is preparation disguised as waiting. Positioning often requires humility. God may position you under leadership before he positions you in leadership. He may place you in support roles before central roles. Pride resists this process. Humility embraces it. Those who learn to serve well learn to lead well. Strategic positioning builds skill, patience, and understanding before authority is granted. Some positioning felt like reduction, less visibility, fewer invitations, smaller platforms. This was not regression, it was refinement. God reduces noise so focus increases. Focus sharpens effectiveness. Strategic positioning removes distractions so growth can deepen. What looks smaller often produces greater impact later. Positioning also determines protection. God places you where you are shielded from unnecessary battles. Some conflicts did not reach you because you were moved out of their path. Protection is positioning you away from what could damage you before you are strong enough to confront it. God protects purpose until it is mature enough to withstand pressure. Another aspect of strategic positioning is alignment with flow. When positioned correctly, effort produces results. When misaligned, effort produces exhaustion. You may notice that things feel easier now. Not effortless, but efficient. That efficiency is a sign of correct positioning. You are working with the current, not against it. God also positions you for influence, not just success. Influence requires credibility. Credibility is built through experience. Positioning exposed you to environments that shaped your understanding. You learned how systems work. You observed dynamics. You gained insight. That insight will matter when your voice carries weight. Strategic positioning prepares you to influence wisely. Positioning can feel isolating because it separates you from what is familiar. Isolation is not abandonment, it is focus. God removes excess interaction so you can develop discernment. Discernment is essential for what is next. You will need to recognize opportunities quickly and distractions immediately. Strategic positioning trains your perception. Some positioning involved stillness. God told you to wait when you wanted to move. Stillness teaches restraint. Restraint is power under control. Those who cannot wait cannot lead effectively. Strategic positioning develops discipline. Discipline sustains momentum. Positioning also includes alignment with provision. God does not send resources randomly. He sends them where they are stewarded well. Positioning qualifies you for provision. When God sees readiness, supply follows. That is why some needs were unmet earlier. Positioning was incomplete. Another reason positioning matters is sustainability. God is not interested in temporary success. He positions you for longevity. Longevity requires structure, support, and stamina. Strategic positioning builds those foundations quietly. You are not being rushed because what is coming must last. Positioning often feels uncomfortable because it stretches identity. You may feel out of place before you feel established. That discomfort signals growth. You are adapting to a new level. Growth always feels awkward before it feels natural. Strategic positioning stretches capacity. God positions you where your strengths are maximized and your weaknesses are supported. You are not expected to do everything. Positioning places you within systems that complement you. Collaboration becomes possible. Isolation decreases. Strategic positioning aligns you with others who carry what you do not. There is also a spiritual dimension to positioning. God moves you out of atmospheres that drain faith and into ones that build it. Environment influences belief. Belief influences action. Strategic positioning protects faith so action remains aligned. What is next requires precision. Precision demands placement. You are not stepping randomly into the future. You are being guided intentionally. Every adjustment mattered. Every pause mattered. Every shift mattered. Strategic positioning prepares you to recognize opportunity when it appears. You will not miss it because you are already there. Opportunity will not need to chase you. It will meet you in position. That is why alignment feels calm rather than frantic. Calm is a sign that placement is correct. God positions before He promotes. Promotion without positioning creates instability. Positioning without promotion creates patience. Patience prepares you for promotion. This order matters. You are in the right place, even if you do not yet see the full picture. Positioning is not glamorous, but it is powerful. It determines trajectory. It decides access. It influences outcome. You are not lost, you are placed. You are not waiting aimlessly. You are positioned intentionally. What comes next will make sense of where you are standing now, as placement, posture, timing, and alignment converge to support movement that will feel natural rather than forced, deliberate rather than rushed, because strategic positioning has already done the work required to ensure that when opportunity arrives, you are not scrambling to catch up, but already present, prepared, aware, and aligned with the direction forward that is unfolding without chaos as placement continues to hold you steady in the exact space where what is coming can reach you without resistance. Waiting is not passive when faith is active. There is a difference between waiting in uncertainty and waiting in expectancy. You have moved from hoping something might happen to knowing something is unfolding. That internal shift matters. Witnessing begins where waiting ends. God never intended for waiting to be a permanent posture. It was preparation for perception. You were not just waiting for a result. You were being trained to recognize it when it arrived. Waiting sharpens awareness. When movement is slow, sensitivity increases. You notice details you would miss if everything happened quickly. God uses waiting to fine-tune discernment so you can identify what is authentic and what is counterfeit. When breakthrough begins, many opportunities appear. Not all of them are aligned. Discernment protects you from distractions disguised as answers. Waiting prepares you to witness wisely. Waiting also strips illusion. It removes the fantasy of instant transformation and replaces it with respect for process. Process builds stability. You learn that sustainable change requires alignment, not impulse. That understanding shifts how you respond when movement begins. You are no longer rushing to label every change as breakthrough. You are observing, evaluating, and confirming. Witnessing requires patience as much as waiting does. There was a time when waiting felt heavy. Silence felt like absence. But silence was instruction without words. God was teaching you how to remain grounded without constant feedback. That grounding matters now because witnessing requires presence. If you are always anticipating the next thing, you miss the thing unfolding in front of you. Waiting trained you to stay present. Witnessing is not just seeing outcomes, it is recognizing patterns forming. You begin to notice consistency where there was chaos, stability where there was fluctuation, favor where there was friction. These shifts do not announce themselves dramatically. They reveal themselves through repetition. Waiting trained you to notice subtle progress. That awareness keeps you aligned. Witnessing also requires humility. Breakthrough does not always look the way you imagined. It often comes quieter, simpler, more integrated into daily life. Humility allows you to receive without disappointment when fulfillment looks different than expectation. Waiting adjusted expectations so reality could be appreciated rather than resisted. Another purpose of waiting was to separate desire from identity. You are no longer defined by what you are waiting for. That freedom allows you to witness without pressure. Pressure distorts perception. When urgency is removed, clarity increases. You can now observe movement without trying to control it. Witnessing thrives in clarity. Waiting also built trust. You learn to trust God without constant reassurance. That trust stabilizes you during transition. Transitions can be disorienting. Without trust, witnessing becomes anxiety. With trust, witnessing becomes confirmation. You are not guessing whether God is at work. You are recognizing how He is working. Witnessing involves responsibility. When you see movement, you are accountable for how you respond. Obedience becomes critical. Waiting prepared you to respond without panic. You are not reacting impulsively. You are responding intentionally. That distinction matters. Reaction is emotional. Response is aligned. Witnessing also requires gratitude. Gratitude anchors you in the present. It prevents you from minimizing small confirmations while waiting for larger ones. Waiting taught you to value progress, not just completion. That value system allows you to witness without frustration. You honor each step because you understand that steps lead to outcomes. Waiting trained your endurance. Endurance allows you to witness sustained movement without burning out. Breakthrough is not a moment, it is a season. Seasons require stamina. Waiting strengthened you for longevity. You are prepared to remain consistent after the excitement fades. Witnessing requires faithfulness beyond the initial shift. Another shift from waiting to witnessing is ownership. Waiting can feel like something happening to you. Witnessing feels like something happening with you. Partnership replaces passivity. You recognize your role. You participate with intention. God does not bypass you, He invites you. Waiting taught you submission. Witnessing activates collaboration. Witnessing also changes language. You stop saying, "on day," and start saying, "no, I see." Language reveals perception. Perception shapes behavior. Waiting shifted how you speak because it shifted how you see. You are no longer speaking from lack, but from observation. That shift reinforces alignment. Waiting exposed what you could not control. Witnessing reveals what you can steward. Control gave way to stewardship. Stewardship requires awareness, discipline, and care. Waiting developed those qualities. Now you can manage what unfolds without overwhelming yourself. Witnessing involves management, not just celebration. Witnessing also requires courage. Seeing movement means risk. You must step into what you once prayed for. Waiting felt safe because expectations were suspended. Witnessing demands action. Courage grows when you realize that God is moving with you, not ahead of you, leaving you behind. Waiting built confidence for that step. Witnessing involves discernment of timing. Not everything that moves requires immediate response. Some things require observation before engagement. Waiting trained you to pause before acting. That pause protects alignment. Witnessing with wisdom ensures sustainability. Waiting also removed entitlement. You no longer believe breakthrough is owed to you. You recognize it as entrusted to you. That perspective produces humility and care. You handle what you see unfolding with reverence rather than consumption. Witnessing becomes stewardship. Witnessing brings peace. Peace confirms alignment. You may not have all answers, but you have assurance. Assurance allows you to move forward without anxiety. Waiting built that assurance. You are not rushing to finish the story, you are present in it. The transition from waiting to witnessing is subtle but powerful. It marks a shift from anticipation to observation, from hope to confirmation, from prayer to partnership. You are not standing on the outside anymore. You are inside the process. Waiting prepared your eyes, your heart, and your posture for this moment. As witnessing unfolds, stay grounded. Do not abandon the disciplines that sustained you in waiting. They will stabilize you in movement. What carried you through silence will carry you through sound. Witnessing does not mean completion. It means confirmation. Confirmation strengthens faith. Faith sustains progress. You are now seeing what you once believed without evidence. That seeing changes everything. The season has shifted. You are no longer asking if God is moving. You are recognizing where He is moving. Waiting has given way to awareness. Awareness has given way to participation. Participation will give way to manifestation as alignment continues to unfold, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, clearly, and undeniably. As you witness progress replacing anticipation, movement replacing stillness, and confirmation replacing questions. Because what you waited for is now unfolding in front of you in real time, inviting you to remain present, responsive, and aligned as the story continues to write.